Hello, this is part 2 of my DVD collection video where I talk about my favorite horror films that came out in the 1970s, but if you haven't already, go check out part 1 of this video. The first movie I want to talk about is not technically a horror movie, it's more of a science fiction drama, but I put it on this list because, honestly, I think the premise of this movie is pretty damn scary, and that movie is Soylent Green. Now, Soylent Green stars Charlton Heston, and it's set in the not-too-distant future, and basically it's about this detective played by Charlton Heston who is investigating this murder, and the person who was murdered was the leader of this corporation that makes this food product called Soylent Green, and really the whole mystery revolves around what Soylent Green actually is, and basically it's set in the future and the world is getting overpopulated, and basically people live off this food product called Soylent Green because natural resources are at like an all-time low. It's a really scary movie just because of the whole idea of the world getting overpopulated, which really isn't, considering that it is kind of happening. A movie like this honestly doesn't seem too far from the truth, but, so it is a very scary movie in that regards. I mean, it's more of a science fiction film than a horror film, but I do consider it to be kind of a horror film in a way, but Soylent Green is a movie I would definitely recommend, and this is based on a book called Make Room by Harry Harrison, I believe, but yeah, I would definitely recommend Soylent Green. The next movie I want to talk about is another movie which is more sci-fi than horror, but it can be considered horror in a way, especially towards the end of this movie where you do get some rather horrific scenes, but that movie is Westworld. Now, this is actually written and directed by Michael Crichton, who is actually an author, and he would go on to write the book Jurassic Park, which of course the movie Jurassic Park was based on. But Westworld, it's set in the future, and it's about this theme park where they have different sections of the theme park, and basically if a person wanted to go back in time, they can go to this theme park where they have these robots acting like if somebody wanted to go back to the Old West, they have all these robots acting like people did back in the Old West, and they have a section of the theme park for like Roman times where they have all these robots acting like people did back in Roman times, and then they have a section of the theme park where they have all these robots acting like people did back in the Middle Ages. But what happens is something goes horribly wrong where the robots start acting on their own. It's a really good movie, and it did remind me a lot of Jurassic Park, which isn't surprising considering it's made by the same person who would go on to write the book Jurassic Park. But it has a very similar premise to Jurassic Park in the sense that it's about a theme park that goes horribly wrong. But yeah, Westworld, it's a really good movie. I would definitely recommend it. It's more of a science fiction film than a horror film, but it can kind of be considered horror in a way. But yeah, that's Westworld. The next movie I want to talk about is The Exorcist from 1973, and The Exorcist is such a classic movie. Now, I actually do consider this movie to be more of a drama film than a horror movie, but it's still definitely a horror movie, but to me, I always looked at it as more of a drama film that just happens to feature supernatural elements in it, but, it's still definitely a horror film. I just always considered it to be more drama than horror, but The Exorcist is a great movie. Like, this is pretty much like a mandatory movie to see if you're a horror fan, but in my opinion, this isn't just one of the greatest horror movies ever made, but this is one of the greatest films of all time, in my opinion. And this movie actually won a couple of Academy Awards when it came out, and the film is based on a book by William Peter Blatty, and I have read the book that that this movie is based on, but yeah, The Exorcist is a great movie. Like, what I really like about this movie is, even though it is a supernatural movie, it's very much grounded in reality. Like, the way it's made, it makes it seem very realistic, despite the fact that it's all supernatural stuff happening. It feels very realistic, like, it's very much grounded in reality. But The Exorcist, it's a great film. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it. The next movie I want to talk about is a made-for-TV movie called Bad Ronald, and this is a really, really good movie. Basically, it's about this kid who accidentally kills this girl, and what happens is he realizes that the police would probably be after him, and he thinks that nobody will believe him if he says it was an accident. So what happens is his mother ends up hiding him inside this, like, hidden room in their house, and what happens is she later goes out because she's really sick, and she goes to the doctor, but she ends up dying, and this kid is pretty much left there. And what happens is months go by, and this new family moves in, and they don't realize that this kid is pretty much living inside their walls, and he starts to really kind of deteriorate mentally because of all the time he's spending inside these walls. And it's actually a pretty sad movie, because honestly, I actually felt bad for the kid, because he realized that he didn't really mean to kill this girl, but he starts to go crazy because of all the time he's spending alone in these walls. It's, like I said, it's a pretty sad movie, but I would definitely recommend Bad Ronald. It's a really good made-for-TV movie. The next movie I want to talk about is Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. Now, this is part of the Hammer Frankenstein series, and this is probably the darkest and definitely the goriest out of all the Hammer Frankenstein films, and unfortunately this was the final Hammer Frankenstein film, but to be honest, I actually think this is one of the best out of the Hammer Frankenstein series, and I'm actually going to be doing a review on this in October, because every October I do something that I call Horror Month, where I review all the films in different horror franchises. So this October I'm going to be reviewing all the Hammer Frankenstein films, so in October you'll be seeing a review of this film from me. The next movie I want to talk about is a movie I have on this public domain box set called Horror Classics, and the movie I want to talk about is actually one of the Hammer Dracula films, and that movie is, hold on a second, The Satanic Rites of Dracula. Now, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, as I said, is part of the Hammer Dracula series, and I already did a review on this, so you can go check out that review if you want, but The Satanic Rites of Dracula is probably my favorite of the Hammer Dracula series, and I know a lot of fans don't like this one, but I always enjoyed this one myself. But yeah, that's The Satanic Rites of Dracula. This movie also goes by the title Count Dracula and his Vampire Brides, so if you get like one of those public domain box sets and you see a movie that's called Count Dracula and his Vampire Brides, that's probably this movie as well. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this movie. The next movie I want to talk about is Phase 4, and basically this is about this phenomenon that happens where these ants develop near human intelligence, and it's a really good movie. I would definitely recommend it, but yeah, that's Phase 4. The next movie I want to talk about is Lisa and the Devil. Now, this is directed by Mario Bava, and I have it on this box set of Mario Bava films. Now, Lisa and the Devil is basically a very dark take on Alice in Wonderland in a way. Like, essentially it's about this tourist named Lisa who sees this, like, fresco of the devil, and she goes wandering somewhere and gets lost, and one thing leads to another, and she ends up at this mansion owned by this old blind woman, and and her son, and she's there with a few other people, and I really don't want to give too much away about this because that would kind of spoil the ending of it, but it's a really, really good movie, and it's a very surreal, very dreamlike movie. You know, like, you're not sure what's real and what isn't real, but it's a very good film, and in the film, Telly Savalas plays Satan, and he does a really good job as the devil in this movie. Now, there's another version of this movie called The House of Exorcism, which I haven't seen the whole thing of yet, but apparently House of Exorcism is the same movie as Lisa and the Devil, only they re-edited it and they added new scenes in it of some kind of exorcism to make it like an Exorcist ripoff. I haven't seen the whole thing of House of Exorcism yet, but I definitely recommend Lisa and the Devil. I think it's a really, really good movie. And I haven't seen too many Mario Bava films, but, you know, I've seen Black Sabbath, I've seen Black Sunday, I've seen Bay of Blood, but honestly, I think Lisa and the Devil might actually be my favorite out of the Mario Bava films I have seen, but yeah, if you haven't seen Lisa and the Devil, definitely check it out. The next movie I want to talk about is From Beyond the Grave. Now, this is an anthology film, and it stars Peter Cushing, and basically in the movie, Peter Cushing plays this antique shop owner, and each story in the movie kind of revolves around a different person who goes to the antique shop and takes something from Peter Cushing's antique shop, and essentially each story would revolve around whatever antique they get from the antique shop. But yeah, From Beyond the Grave is a pretty good film. I would definitely recommend it if you're into anthology films, and the film also has Donald Pleasance in it as well, but yeah, I would definitely recommend From Beyond the Grave. The next movie I want to talk about is The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. This movie also goes by the title Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Now, this is about these two people, a man and a woman. They don't really know each other, but the guy needs the girl to give him a lift somewhere, but she's going to see her sister, but what happens is when they get to her sister's house, they find out that her husband was murdered, and, you know, now they're being harassed by the police because the police think they had something to do with it, but it turns out that the murder was actually committed by a zombie, and basically in the movie there's this machine that these guys are using that spreads this radiation that's used to, like, kill bugs, but it turns out that the radiation is actually bringing dead bodies back from the dead as zombies. It's a really good movie. I would definitely recommend it. And like I said, it goes by two titles, The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, and it also goes by the title Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. But yeah, I would recommend this movie. The next movie I want to talk about is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and of course everybody knows about this movie. Now, this of course is about a group of like young adults who are down in Texas, and they run into this psychotic family, and of course the movie features the character of Leatherface, who has gone on to become a horror movie icon, and this is credited as being one of the goriest movies ever made, but there's hardly any gore in the movie. The movie's honestly a lot more psychological than it gets credit for, you know, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a really good movie, and I actually have a poster of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre right over there, actually signed by Tobe Hooper, actually, but yeah, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. The next movie I want to talk about is a made-for-TV movie called Trilogy of Terror. Now, this is directed by Dan Curtis, who I know directed a lot of made-for-TV movies back in the 70s, and this is actually written by Richard Matheson and William F. Nolad. Now, William F. Nolad wrote the book that was made into the movie Logan's Run, and Basically, this is an anthology film. It's 3 stories in one, and each of the stories in this movie are based on Richard Matheson's stories, and in the movie, Karen Black plays a different character in all 3 of the stories, but Trilogy of Terror is a movie I highly recommend. It's a very good film, especially if you're into anthology films, or if you're into made-for-TV movies from the 70s, I would definitely recommend it. The next movie I want to talk about is a movie I have on the Chilling Classics box set, and this is a movie that I'm actually rather surprised is even on this box set, because this box set has a lot of really obscure movies on it, but the movie I want to talk about is actually a really well-known movie, so I'm actually kind of surprised it's even on this box set. But the movie I want to talk about is Dario Argento's Deep Red. Now, Deep Red is a giallo film, and it's about this musician who witnesses his neighbor get murdered, and his neighbor was like a psychic, and what happens is him and this reporter are now trying to figure out who the killer actually is, and it's a really good movie, and it's actually a really creepy movie too, and you'll understand if you see the film. And the movie also has great music in it from Goblin, and, you know, absolutely beautiful music. I definitely recommend Deep Red if you haven't seen it. The next movie I want to talk about is a movie that, of course, everybody has heard of. Like, if you haven't heard of this movie, you've been living under a rock, and that movie, of course, is Jaws. Now, what I really like about Jaws is it kind of defies genre, because it can be looked at as a horror film, but it can be also looked at as an action-adventure movie. It can be looked at as a drama, so Jaws, it's one of those movies that almost seems to defy genre, but in general, I would call it a horror film, but Jaws is a really good movie, and this, of course, is directed by Steven Spielberg, and this wasn't Steven Spielberg's first movie, but this was definitely the first movie to really make Spielberg what he is now. But Jaws is a great movie. Now, this is based on the book by Peter Benchley, and I have read the book, and the movie is actually quite different from the book. Like, in the book, like, they had all these different subplots and stuff, and the movie cuts a lot of that out, and even though I love the book, I'm kind of glad the movie turned out the way it did, because if this movie was true to the book at all, it would be a very different movie from what we got. But, Jaws, it is a good movie. I definitely recommend it. The next movie I want to talk about is a movie that I can't really say I recommend, but because this is definitely not a movie for everybody. But the reason I put it on this list is because as a horror film, this movie definitely disturbed me, but, once again, I can't recommend this movie for everybody, because this really is a very, very disturbing film, and that movie is Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom. Like I said, this is a very disturbing film, and this is coming from the same person who has seen Cannibal Holocaust like 12 times already, but the reason I put it on this list is because this is one of the few horror films that really did disturb me. But then again, some people might not even call this a horror film. Like, it's been labeled as more of a war drama, but in my opinion, it's definitely horror, though, because some of the stuff that happens in this movie is just horrible. I would consider it to be a horror film, but it's horror on a much different level than the other films I've talked about in this video. But yeah, I would kind of recommend it, but if you watch it, definitely know what you're getting into before you see it. But yeah, that's Salo. And I'm gonna end this video off here and continue with a part 3, and bye.